Chris Kyle is one of those examples of a military individual who was honored and looked upon with great respect as a Navy SEAL war sniper and hero, but with time, people began to see the issues with him and his credibility as questions started being asked about his actions and stories. Back in 2014, when the Clint Eastwood film American Sniper, which was based on Chris Kyle's memoir of the same name, came out, there was a lot of heated discussions online debating whether or not Chris Kyle was truly a hero, if he made the kills he did, and what other fabricated stories he told. At the time, I grew interested in the guy and decided to read his memoir, pretty much evaluate him, and decide for myself who Kyle was as a man. Now, this of course is dependent upon the version of the memoir I read, but from what I read about the man, the film doesn't really depict him in an accurate way when I saw it. But with that said, it's hard for me not to compare the fictionalized version of Kyle, played by Bradley Cooper, and what was presented in his memoir. In this video, I am going to be constantly comparing the fictional character with the real man, as the two individuals are quite unique to look at all these years later. Around the time I was reading the memoir, my view of Kyle was all of a sudden complicated with a certain event. In 2016, I became aware of an interview that was done by Joe Rogan with Jesse Ventura. Apparently hinted in an early edition of the memoir and later clearly stated on the Opening Anthony talk show, Chris Kyle had confronted Jesse Ventura, who both were attending an event for veterans for a graduation, and punched him in the face for some reason. This claim soon led to a legal battle between the two men, and the public began asking questions about Chris Kyle. When Jesse Ventura was having his conflict with Kyle, and later with his estate, he was receiving a lot of hate for going after Chris Kyle at that time, and had nearly a falling out with members of the SEAL community. If you haven't seen the podcast, I will link a clip down below in the description, as Jesse Ventura covers the issue in detail. But I want to cover the book, tell y'all my impressions of Chris Kyle that I got from his autobiography, and also look at the film. Because upon rewatching the movie, I have some things I wanted to point out, as the movie is a lot better than I remembered. So, getting into it, Chris Kyle was born on April 9, 1974 in Odessa, Texas. He graduated from Midlothian High School in 1992 and attended Tarleton State University for 2 years. After a bull riding injury in a rodeo, he quit school to enlist in the military. Chris Kyle was 25 at the time when he joined the Navy SEALs as a sniper. In the book, with Chapter 1, Busting Broncos and Other Ways of Having Fun, we learn about his life growing up in Texas, his family, and the traditional values he was brought up with. He obviously discusses his love for being a cowboy and why he changed his direction in life to be in the military. In Chapter 2, we learn about the training he received to become a SEAL, and in Chapter 3, we learn about the missions he participated in prior to the beginning of the Iraq War. From there, the chapters cover his involvement with the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the Battle of Fallujah in 2004, the Battle of Ramadi in 2006, and Sadr City in 2008. Obviously, for me at the time when I read the book, these later chapters are the most interesting as we learn about the engagements he was in, the tactics used in urban warfare, and how he hunted insurgents as a sniper. I do find the anecdotes Chris gives about the firefights he had in all these battles are pretty great to read, as we learn more about the close connection the SEALs have with the Marines in fighting insurgents. You read the grueling task of being a sniper, patiently waiting for targets to appear, and the horror that comes with being in a gun battle. All these details feel like necessary history lesson from the perspective of the soldiers fighting, which is one of the main reasons I would say to get the book and read it. But also, as you read, you do begin to understand Chris Kyle's personality. He's your typical Southern cowboy, as he comes off as arrogant at times while also having a fun sense of humor. Very cocky and confident in how capable he is as a sniper, you begin to see that Kyle is not just this standard noble stoic hero which is presented in the film or in other media. With the earlier chapters covering his beliefs and values, you essentially get an example of a rugged individualist from Texas who is committed to his God and his family. And that's pretty much it. From there, you don't read more and see an individual who changes over time, but instead someone who isn't willing to evolve their mindset or philosophy with the experience of war. There are also other aspects of his personality that seem quite ignorant, and this is evident when you read his views of the Iraqis in general. This is where you do begin to see his black and white, very simplistic outlook on the world. Constantly referring to the Iraqis throughout the book as savages, you come to understand that the man really doesn't have any deeper thoughts on why the war is necessary or if the US is justified in the invasion of Iraq. He sees the war as a simple conflict of good versus evil, where they must kill as many of the evil fanatical insurgents as they can. To him, the Iraq war is just another modern day crusade that he is participating in. He even includes in the book a short section talking about actually uncovering weapons of mass destruction in the beginning of the war. Yeah, this is where I began to have questions on the validity of his stories. He states that he comes across barrels of chemical material that came from France and Germany and sees that this is a necessary justification for the invasion of Iraq. Kyle doesn't go further into detail about coming across the material, and we just have to take his word for it. Even though this should be a vital find with barrels of chemical material found, he just states it as if it didn't even need additional explanation in the chapter and moves on to discussing other encounters he makes in the beginning of the invasion of Iraq. There are other bizarre claims made in the book, especially in chapter 7, that force me to ask questions on how true these stories are, but the finding of the weapons of mass destruction is quite important and needs to be addressed. Like, can it be verified that he even came across this material, or are there any other witnesses to this incident? Now, from what I remember about reading the book, I don't remember another ridiculous claim made in the memoir that has gotten a lot of media attention. Apparently, Chris Kyle made an absurd claim that he was present in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina came through and destroyed the city, and that he was actively sniping at looters during the chaos after that storm. Many people and many media outlets have repeatedly said this never happened, as he wasn't at all present in the city, nor was he killing looters, which would be quite horrifying if that were be true. This claim got a lot of attention and was examined by many media groups for a period of time until the whole incident was soon taken and kind of forgotten, with Jesse Ventura's incident coming up. I don't need to go over the details, as I feel Jesse Ventura himself does his best in explaining the whole nonsense that happened and how it really impacted his life. Like I said, go ahead and check out the clip I linked below and come to your own conclusions. Now, when it comes to the 2014 film, there's a lot for me to talk about, as the fictionalized version of Chris Kyle is distinct from his real life counterpart. But with that said, this character is fascinating and I really have to discuss this. Directed by Clint Eastwood, American Sniper was certainly a huge hit when it came out in 2014, having grossed nearly $550 million at the box office. While the film got somewhat positive reviews at the time, it was also heavily criticized for its depiction of the Iraq War, the justifications for it, and of Chris Kyle himself. When I saw the film for the first time, I simply wrote it off as a pro-war, cheaply made propaganda film that was depicting a ridiculously positive version of Chris Kyle. But with my recent rewatch, I feel the fictional version of Chris Kyle goes through actual personal growth, something that is never present within the memoir which the film is based upon. Bradley Cooper playing Kyle is the best aspect of that film, as his performance is what sells me on the movie, considering that there's a lot of bad acting, CGI, editing choices, and writing. We see that early on, the film pretty much lines up with the memoir, as we get great scenes at Chris's life prior to joining the SEALs and being deployed to Iraq. Obviously, though, the film has to take liberties with the truth, as many parts of the movie never happened in real life. For example, the film shows Kyle's commitment to hunting down and eliminating a Syrian sniper who has been killing many Marines and a few SEALs close to him. At the end of the movie, there's a dramatic showdown scene where Kyle is finally able to kill the sniper with an incredibly long shot. While the Syrian sniper is mentioned briefly in the book, there was never any confrontation or dramatic showdown between the two soldiers. But the scene, though fictionalized, is a great moment for the character in the story, as we see this version of Chris Kyle, who has dedicated his life to the Navy SEALs in pursuit of fighting for his family and country, has no real satisfaction in the end in killing this enemy sniper. We have seen throughout the movie that Chris wants to fight to protect those close to him, but his obsession with his job begins to take a toll on his family back home as he commits himself more and more to the military. He starts to find that the killing won't end, and that's pretty much futile to continue fighting, as he can't possibly save every Marine or Navy SEAL near him. This is something I missed out on the first time I was viewing the film, and I have to commend the director, Clint Eastwood, for putting this element in the film, as it does feel like it makes it almost a genuine anti-war story. We ultimately see the price of this dedication and obsession Chris Kyle has to pay fighting this war, as no peace is realistic, and it will just take more and more of a psychological toll on him and his family. Also, we see the character has trouble with many soldiers and civilians viewing him as a hero. There's actually a great scene where he and his son are approached by a Marine who he apparently saved in Iraq. The situation becomes awkward for Chris, as he isn't prepared to handle people stating that he saved their lives. Wonderfully acted. I love the scene because we see how uncomfortable it can be for some soldiers to be viewed as heroes, as handling those types of interactions can truly be alien to them. The last important scene which I truly enjoyed is where Chris is finally done with the war and has come back to the States. But instead of trying to immediately go back to his family, he stops at a bar and calls his wife. We see the character break down, as through the great acting from Bradley Cooper, we understand that he has some regret over the decisions he made, that he has to bear the cost of fighting the war for so long, and also now has to process the trauma he went through being in a pointless conflict. Truly an excellent part of the film that showcases the growth and progress of the character, as he has to put the fighting behind him and move on with his life. Then we see Chris Kyle work with the VA, helping disabled veterans, as he finds work that is meaningful, which can also help him in readjusting to civilian life. Now, this is true to real life, as Chris Kyle did help veterans by pairing with FIGHTCO Cares Foundation, a non-profit organization that created the Heroes Project to provide free in-home fitness equipment, individualized programs, personal training, and life coaching to in-need veterans with disabilities. Sadly though, helping out a troubled veteran did cost him his life. On February 2nd, 2013, Kyle and his friend Chad Littlefield were shot and killed by Eddie Ray Ruth at the Rough Creek Ranch Lodge Resort shooting range in Erith County, Texas. Ruth was a 25-year-old U.S. Marine Corps veteran from Lancaster, Texas. Kyle and Littlefield had reportedly taken Ruth to the gun range in an effort to help him with his post-traumatic stress disorder, which he suffered from with his time in the military. It's truly awful that both these men were attempting to help this individual who was not only suffering from PTSD from the war, but also had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and in doing so, they lost their lives. The real-life Chris Kyle did noble acts and saved many lives, both through his service in Iraq and also helping veterans here in the United States. So it just makes the situation even more bizarre to me when the man fabricated stories that don't benefit him in the end. All it did was somewhat tarnish his reputation and legacy. Obviously, Bradley Cooper's version of Chris Kyle is completely fictionalized, but I feel this is a better version of a man who did things that only made people turn against him. With Cooper's version, we see a soldier that has to deal with the war in his own way while trying to move on and refocus his life. But with the real Chris, he states that he never really regretted being a SEAL, nor does he ever think over the reasons why the US needed to invade and destroy Iraq, which is not even covered in the memoir. Again, in the book, Chris is your typical gung-ho soldier who brags about his killings in a very unsympathetic way and will embellish certain aspects of his tours in Iraq, which makes you constantly question how reliable Kyle is at telling the truth. The memoir, upon release, was a huge success, having sold over 1.2 million copies across all formats, landing atop all major bestseller lists and being one of the best-selling books in 2015. Chris Kyle profited from his book and is yet another example of a veteran who writes a memoir and became highly successful from it. We've seen this before with many other veterans. For example, Marcus Luttrell, another Navy SEAL and friend of Chris Kyle, wrote about his insane combat experience in the book Lone Survivor. Well received and quite successful as well, the book also went on to be adapted into a award-winning war film. Though you can say that Luttrell didn't have the issue of fabricating stories or even having to go to court over false claims like Chris did in real life. It's hard for me to really give my thoughts on Chris Kyle because, as presented in the film, the image a lot of people have of Chris is closer to the fictionalized version than the real life person. I would highly recommend y'all read the book's American Sniper, as I do think it has value with many great accounts of important battles and engagements that occurred during the Iraq War. I will link the free PDF version of the book in the description below for everyone to read and check up on. I would also recommend watching the film just because Bradley Cooper gives such a unique and memorable performance for portraying this enigmatic war hero. The film is a lot better than I thought, as it did present questions on what makes a hero and how people process war. So yeah, I wanted to end this video off with some questions y'all can maybe answer in the comment section down below. Was Chris Kyle truly a hero? How do you now feel about him with the fabricated stories he made? And how should we properly view American military heroes of the past and the present? With that said, I hope everyone enjoyed my brief video on a controversial individual. I know other videos have come out where they covered his life in better detail than this, and I know this is kind of a brief video, so there's not much more to learn from him, but I hope you guys enjoyed this nevertheless. Please do me a favor and like and subscribe if you can, and like always, have a wonderful day.